discuss the impact of the infrastructure bill on the development of electric vehicles. I'm joined by Paul DeCotis, Senior Director in the Energy and Utilities Practice of West Monroe. Hello, Paul.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. So this is interesting. This particular aspect of the infrastructure bill maybe hasn't got as much attention. I believe you described this promise of more than $7.5 billion in EV infrastructure funding as a game changer. Explain that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think, Bob, that the infrastructure bill is the first of its kind to really devote this kind of money and funding to development of electric vehicle infrastructure. It includes not only private charging stations, also utility programs to assist customers in the purchase of electric vehicles, but it also drills it down to the state level and municipal level and for fleet conversions. So there's going to be a lot of money and a lot of activity over a sustained period of time, which provides investors with certainty. We know in the capital markets, investors don't like uncertainty. With the money that's going to be flowing over a designated period of time, with entities knowing how they can access the money and what they can use it for is going to be incredibly helpful. If you couple that with the automobile manufacturers and what they're promising to do, and if you look at the investments being made in smart grid infrastructure, for example, to accommodate the infrastructure, we're going to see an electric grid and a transportation system that looks way different than it looks today.
How long do you think it'll take?
I think probably 8 to 10 years before we see significant change, because we've got to see that scale. And in order to support the EV charging infrastructure, we need to invest in the transmission and distribution system of the utilities.
It's about the time
those projects can take time.
It's about the time that major automakers, I think GM specifically, has said they want us to start selling exclusively electric vehicles by what, 2030, I think, somewhere like that.
That's right, about 2035. That's right.
Yeah, be right on time for that. I guess the big issue is charging stations are an issue for electric vehicle owners now. There aren't enough of them, and they're pretty slow. Will this bill help that? I mean, obviously, it will create more of them. But what about the technology? Do you think it will improve to the point where it won't take 45 minutes to an hour to charge up your car when you're in the middle of a trip?
Yeah, I think so, Bob. I think if you look at some of the fast charging stations that we're already beginning to see make inroads into the market, they can charge pretty quickly. And you can get a charge to get you 20, 30, 40 miles in 10 minutes. So I don't see that being a significant hurdle to overcome. And I think as we see some of the investment funding from the infrastructure bill go to research and development, I think we'll see a public-private partnership to develop faster charge batteries and batteries with a longer life so that customers don't have to worry about range anxiety, for example.
Yeah, range anxiety is certainly a phrase we never used to have used before. What form will these investments take for the commercial sector, though? Will they be outright grants? Will they be loans? Or in your, as you just mentioned, public-private partnerships, tax incentives, all of the above? I mean, just how will the money be dispersed?
Yeah, I think based on current readings of the legislation and talking to folks in Washington, D.C. and some of our partners, we think most of the money will flow through states and municipalities in the form of block grants, not unlike the ERA funding of the Obama administration years or even the Bush administration funding. We'll see it go to the states, and then states will designate the rules according to what the requirements have to be met at the federal level for them to distribute the funds. I do think that there's going to be a need for a public-private partnership. However, as with the ERA grants, government is not going to fund everything. My reading of it so far is that the federal funding could fund up to 80% of a project, private capital the other 20%. So these partnerships will be important.
Of course, this all assumes that this infrastructure bill will be successfully and fully funded, and there's still argument over where they're going to get the money beyond the certain amount of creative accounting that the bill allows for now. Are you confident that the money will, in fact, be there for this purpose?
Yes, if you look at the way they're discussing this in Washington, there's not one single significant source of funding. It's coming from a variety of different sources, which always makes it a little bit easier in Washington to get a deal. It's not all dependent on taxes, so I think that shouldn't be a problem. And if you look at the bipartisan bill, really only $500 million or so is new funding. The other $500 million or so is already planned funding.
Hmm.
While it's referred to as a $1 trillion bill, half of the trillion was already planned.
How does block funding or block distribution of funds work when it gets to the state level? Is the state bound to take that money and use it specifically for the purpose of EV infrastructure and development? Or can they say, we need it for our schools or we need it for public transportation and we're going to put it in that direction? Is that a possibility?
Bob, that's a really, really interesting question, and we don't have the time to dig too deeply, but a first order answer to the question is yes, they're required to spend the funding according to the prescriptive approach given to it. The longer answer is if the program lasts a long time and they fund all the initiatives that they can in the pipeline, and there's additional funding left, they can find creative ways to work between the states and the federal government to spend that money on similar type projects that might not have been in the early prescription.
I see. Does this apply equally to commercial freight transportation, like large trucks as well? Will they also benefit from this investment?
They will from the infrastructure investment in terms of charging, yes. I do believe for long haul trucking, however, the answer might not be electric vehicles, it might be hydrogen powered vehicles, just because of the weight of the batteries and the short distances compared to hydrogen. There are a number of initiatives in the bill that would fund hydrogen research and development and create some hydrogen hubs for some pilot demonstration projects for transportation use, industrial use, and electric generation use. So I think it's going to be a part hydrogen answer for the heavy duty vehicles, for marine and air travel as well.
For that matter, is hydrogen a possible option for passenger transportation as well? And if so, are we risking tying our fortunes to the star of electricity when maybe there's another option out there further down the line?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think hydrogen, it's used now in vehicles. It's to some extent, but it's not green hydrogen. The hydrogen that we're talking about for use in long haul trucking and or power generation, with the advent of more renewables coming online, we see more hydrogen being generated by renewable energy sources and or nuclear sources. But I don't think the market's going to leave hydrogen behind. I don't think it's going to be a question for residential or single occupancy vehicles. It's not going to be a choice between hydrogen and electric. I think the momentum's already there for electric. I think hydrogen will be for more heavy duty vehicles.
Do you think that there are ultimately any clean energy or environmental concerns attached to EVs, the need for rare earth minerals, for instance, to go into them? The fact that electricity may be generated for the cars at a power plant that is not a green facility. What are some issues that might arise there?
Yeah, Bob, I think you're right. And I would agree with that assessment. I think that there are issues that have not really surfaced yet in a big way and been discussed. In addition to what you added, I would also suggest that there's going to be on the back end a need to recycle batteries. And that industry does not yet exist. We saw that with complex fluorescent lighting. We've seen it with some refrigerators. There's got to be a back end way to deal with the waste. In addition to what you said, and generating electricity to supply and create the hydrogen.
Yeah.
Or to fuel the electric vehicles.
But it does seem, I mean, we've talked about some possible stumbling blocks on the road to EV development, but in general, it seems like a pretty positive picture for the future of electric vehicles. Would you say that?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the money here is going to make a big difference.
I think so. I think it's not just the funding, though, Bob. It's the infrastructure that's being put in place around the funding.
Right.
The states already have very aggressive climate policies or carbon mitigation strategies. The states and their regulators are already working with the utility industry for developing make-ready programs to fund incentives for electric vehicles, and also to work with charging developers. So the physical infrastructure and the business infrastructure is already in place. Consider it like a pipeline that's already built and you're just going to put more product through it. In this case, the infrastructure pipeline would be the business relationships and the deals already in place, and now we're just adding additional funding to scale. But I think the physical infrastructure in place and the business infrastructure is there. And by physical, I mean the business relationships, not of course, hardware.
Well, a game changer indeed. It sounds like we're going to see some big changes in that industry and the development prospects. Thank you so much, Paul DeCotis of West Monroe, for cluing us in on the future of electric vehicles in the light of this infrastructure bill funding. Thanks very much for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.